The dust, fine as milled flour, coats Elias Thorne's cracked lips. He squints against the relentless glare of a sun already halfway up its morning climb, a brassy skillet in an unforgiving sky. His gaze sweeps the parched horizon, a familiar tableau of withered cornstalks and earth the color of rust. Another day, another prayer for rain that likely won't be answered. His mule, Jezebel, lets out a mournful bray, echoing the hollow ache in Elias's own stomach. He's checking his meager trapline, more out of habit than hope, when a flicker of unnatural color near a cluster of sun-baked boulders snags his attention. It's a sprawled figure, dark against the pale earth. Caution, a bitter lesson learned from too many lean years, makes him approach slowly. The man lies face down, one arm outstretched as if reaching for salvation. A dark stain blossoms on the back of his worn shirt. Elias nudges him gently with the toe of his boot. A groan, weak as a dying ember, answers. He's alive then, barely. Elias kneels, rolling the man over. The face is gaunt, eyes clouded with a pain that transcends the physical. A bloody froth flecks the man's lips as he struggles to speak, a hand clawing at his breast pocket. Map, she. His voice is a ragged whisper, choked with effort. He fumbles, and a folded piece of coarse paper, stiff with grime and something darker, falls to the dust. The man's eyes, already losing focus, fix on Elias with a desperate intensity. Treasure, but save her. His breath hitches, a final, shuddering sigh, and then he is still. The silence of the plains rushes back in, vast and indifferent. Elias stares at the dead man, then at the crudely drawn map in his hand. Lines and symbols, meaningless at first glance, yet the dying man's words, save her, echo with a chilling urgency that pushes aside the mention of treasure. His own desperation, the failing farm, the gnawing hunger, all vie with this sudden, unexpected burden. Danger's close and a rescue might be at hand. Before we see if justice or peril finds them, share in the comments. What's your favorite story about someone being saved against the odds? And if you're rooting for them, hit like and subscribe. Elias looks from the map to the distant, hazy line of the Broken Tooth Hills, a direction vaguely indicated by one of the map's scrawled arrows. Treasure. The word was a siren song to a man whose pockets held only lint and whose future looked as barren as the land around him. But save her, that was a different call altogether, a heavier weight. He glances back at his struggling homestead, a testament to his sweat and sorrow. There is nothing for him there but slow decay. With a grim set to his jaw, he pockets the map. The dying man's plea, more than any promise of riches, pulls him forward. He straightens, the map a strange, vital pulse in his calloused palm. "All right, Jezebel," he murmurs, his voice rough. "Looks like we got a detour." And with that decision, the familiar despair of his existence gave way to a flicker of something new, something sharp and uncertain, as he turned his back on his failing land and headed towards the beckoning unknown. The sun had climbed higher, beating down with impartial cruelty, by the time Elias finished the grim task of burying the stranger. He fashioned a crude cross from 2 pieces of scavenged wood, a small token of respect in a land that offered little. The man had carried no identification, only the map and a few spent cartridges in his belt. A prospector, perhaps, or someone fleeing trouble. Elias didn't dwell on it. His focus was the map, now spread on a flat rock, weighted against the prairie wind. It was drawn on the back of a tattered bill of sale for mining supplies, the ink faded in places, smudged in others. It depicted a series of canyons and rock formations he vaguely recognized as belonging to the foothills of the Broken Tooth Range, a wild, untamed stretch of country few men ventured into without good reason. A crudely drawn X was marked deep within a narrow, winding canyon, labeled with a single, shaky word, refuge. Treasure, the man had said. But his last, most urgent plea was, save her. What her, and from what? Elias Thorne was a man ground down by years of fruitless toil. His father had broken his back on this same unforgiving plot of land, and his father before him. Each generation had hoped for better, and each had been met with drought, blight, or the simple, crushing weight of bad luck. His wife, Martha, had succumbed to fever 2 winters past, taking with her the last vestiges of warmth from his small cabin and his heart. Now, there was only the dust, the debts, and the gnawing solitude. The idea of gold, of a sudden reversal of fortune, was a potent lure. It could mean saving his farm, buying seed, perhaps even hiring a hand. But the dying man's eyes, filled with that desperate plea, haunted him. He packed what little he had, a water skin, a handful of dried jerky, his grandfather's old colt, and a dozen rounds of ammunition. Jezebel, his aging mule, was his only companion, her presence a small comfort in the vast emptiness. He felt a pang of guilt leaving his parched cornfields to their fate, but there was little to be done for them now. This map, this unexpected quest, was a deviation, a wild chance, but it was also movement, and movement felt better than the slow stagnation of his current life. As he rode towards the hazy outline of the Broken Tooth Hills, the landscape grew rougher, more desolate. The flat plains gave way to rolling, rocky terrain, cut through by dry arroyos and dotted with thorny scrub. He passed no homesteads, saw no sign of other travelers. It was a land that kept its secrets well. He thought of the dead man's words. If there was a woman in need of saving, who was she? And who would leave her in such a remote place? The notion of foul play settled uneasily in his gut. Late in the afternoon, as he navigated a narrow pass, he saw a flicker of movement high on a ridge to his left. He pulled Jezebel to a halt, his hand instinctively going to the Colt holstered at his hip. He squinted, but could make out nothing distinct, perhaps just a coyote or a trick of the light. Yet, a prickle of unease traced its way down his spine. This land felt watchful, and not in a welcoming way. He remembered hushed tales in the distant settlement of outlaws using the Broken Tooth's labyrinthine canyons as hideouts. The thought that the treasure might be ill-gotten gains, and the her, a captive or a complication, added a grim layer to his undertaking. The dead man hadn't looked like an outlaw, more a victim, but appearances could be deceiving. He pushed the thought aside. He had the map, and he had a direction. For now, that was enough. The first night, he made a cold camp in the lee of a rock outcropping, the stars blazing with an intensity rarely seen near settled lands. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and Jezebel's soft snuffling as she cropped at sparse patches of dry grass. Elias chewed his jerky slowly, his mind replaying the encounter with the dying man, scrutinizing the crude map by the faint starlight. The X seemed to be near a formation described as twin sisters, two distinctive peaks he hoped to sight by the next day. The word refuge seemed more poignant now, less like a place of hidden wealth and more like a desperate sanctuary. The following day, the terrain became even more challenging. He led Jezebel more often than he rode, scrambling over loose scree and navigating narrow ledges. The twin sisters came into view around mid-morning, just as the map had indicated, two stark, granite spires rising against the azure sky. His heart beat a little faster. He was getting closer. The map then showed a path veering into a tight canyon, marked with a symbol that looked like a broken tree. He found it late in the afternoon, a lightning-blasted pine at the canyon's mouth, its skeletal branches reaching skyward. The air in the canyon was cooler, the light dimmer. The walls rose sheer on either side, composed of rust-colored rock that seemed to press in on him. Jezebel picked her way carefully over the uneven ground. The silence here was different, heavier, imbued with a sense of waiting. It was almost dusk when he saw it, tucked back into a recess in the canyon wall, almost invisible until he was nearly upon it, was a structure. It wasn't a cave, as he'd half expected, but a small, dilapidated cabin, built of rough-hewn logs, its roof sagging, its single window boarded over. A thin trail of smoke, so faint it was almost invisible, curled from a rusty stovepipe. This had to be the place marked X, refuge. Elias dismounted, his hand resting on his colt. He approached cautiously, every sense alert. There was no sound from within, no sign of life other than that wisp of smoke. He called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" His voice sounded loud in the confined space. Only the echo answered. He moved closer, peering at the boarded window. The planks were old, weathered, but secured firmly. The door, a crude affair of mismatched boards, was similarly fortified from the outside, a heavy wooden bar dropped into iron brackets. This wasn't a refuge, it was a prison. A cold knot formed in Elias's stomach. The dying man's words, "Save her," now screamed in his mind. He moved to the door, examining the bar. It was heavy, but he thought he could lift it. He put his shoulder to it, grunting with effort. It shifted, then scraped free of the brackets. He pulled the door open a crack, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark, smelling of stale air, wood smoke, and something else. Fear. "Hello?" he called again, softer this time. A faint rustle came from the darkest corner of the cabin, then a voice, hesitant and raspy. "Who? Who is it?" It was a woman's voice. Relief, sharp and immediate, washed over Elias, quickly followed by a surge of anger at whoever had left her like this. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, keeping his tone calm. "I found a man. He had a map. He asked me to help." There was a long silence. Then, "Silas? Did you find Silas?" The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't make it, Mom. I'm sorry. He sent me." He pushed the door open wider, letting in the fading daylight. In the dimness, he could make out a figure huddled on a makeshift bed of straw and old blankets. She was young, her face pale and smudged with dirt, her eyes large and dark in the gloom, regarding him with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. She was trapped, not by geography, but by human cruelty. This was the treasure the dying man had sent him to find. "Silas, oh no." Her voice broke, a soft sob escaping her. Elias felt a pang of shared grief. He stepped inside, the cramped space barely allowing him to stand upright. "Are you hurt, Mum?" She shook her head, though her slight frame trembled. "Just locked in. For days. They said they'd be back." "Who are they?" Elias asked, his voice grim. "The Caleb brothers," she whispered, her eyes darting towards the door as if expecting them to appear. Silas was trying to get me away from them." Elias looked around the squalid cabin. A bucket in the corner served as a latrine. A few scraps of food lay on a wooden crate. It was a miserable existence. "Well, they ain't coming back to find you here," Elias stated, his resolve hardening. "I'm getting you out." Her eyes searched his face, looking for deceit, for some hidden motive. Elias met her gaze steadily. He was no knight in shining armor, just a struggling farmer, but he knew right from wrong. He had come seeking riches, but had found a responsibility he couldn't shirk. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Lena," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Lena Cartwright." The immediate task was to get Lena out of the canyon and to safety. The Caleb brothers, whoever they were, could return. Lena was weak from her confinement, her legs unsteady when she first tried to stand. Elias offered her his arm, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were calloused from hard labor. She flinched slightly but accepted the support. He gave her the last of his water and a piece of jerky, which she ate slowly, as if unaccustomed to food. While she rested, Elias searched the cabin more thoroughly. There was little of value, just a few worn personal items, a small carved wooden bird, a tattered book of poems. No gold, no hidden strongbox. The treasure Silas had spoken of must have been Lena herself, or perhaps something she knew. He found a small stash of firewood and a nearly empty sack of beans, evidence that her captors had intended her to survive for a while, but not comfortably. As darkness fell, they made a small fire in the rusty stove, more for a sliver of cheer than for warmth, as the canyon held the day's heat. The single room felt suffocatingly small with two of them in it. Lena sat on the straw bed, watching him with those large, haunted eyes. Elias tried to make small talk, asking about Silas. "He was a friend of my father's," she explained, her voice gaining a little strength. "When my father passed, the Caleb brothers, they started making trouble. Claiming my father owed them money, trying to take our small ranch. Silas was helping me gather proof against them, to take to the marshal in Prescott." Her voice faltered. "They found out. They took Silas, beat him badly, left me here. They said if I kept quiet, they might let me go. I think Silas escaped them, tried to get help." Elias listened, his anger simmering. This was more than just a random act of cruelty, it was calculated villainy. "The marshal in Prescott is a good 2 days' ride from here, maybe more with you not being at full strength," Elias said, considering their options. "And we don't know if these Caleb brothers are still looking for Silas, or for you." Lena shivered, despite the warmth from the stove. "They're dangerous men, Mr. Thorne. They won't give up easily if they think I can testify against them." They spent an uneasy night. Elias insisted Lena take the makeshift bed while he settled near the door, his Colt close at hand. Sleep was elusive for him, his mind racing with plans and potential dangers. He was keenly aware of Lena's soft breathing, a fragile sound in the oppressive silence of the canyon. He was a farmer, used to the slow rhythms of the land, not pursuits and outlaws. Yet, a sense of grim purpose had taken root. He had stumbled into this, but he would see it through. The next morning, they left the cabin at first light. Elias helped Lena onto Jezebel, then took the reins, leading the mule out of the shadowy canyon and back into the harsh sunlight. Lena swayed slightly in the saddle, still weak, but her face was set with a quiet determination that impressed Elias. She was a survivor. As they retraced his path, Elias scanned their surroundings constantly. The open country, which had felt merely desolate before, now seemed fraught with potential ambush. Every rock formation, every dip in the terrain, could conceal a threat. They spoke little during the first few hours, the effort of travel and the shared tension creating a silent bond. Elias pointed out landmarks, trying to gauge if Lena recognized any of this country, but it was all new and frightening to her. He learned she was an orphan, her small ranch the only thing she had left in the world. The Caleb brothers were trying to bully her off it, likely because it had a good water source or was situated along a route they wanted to control. Around noon, as they paused to rest Jezebel in the shade of a sparse cottonwood, Lena spoke, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Thorne, why are you doing this? You don't know me. This is dangerous for you." Elias looked at her. Her face was still pale, but some color had returned to her cheeks. Her eyes, clear and direct, held a genuine question. He thought of his failing farm, the emptiness of his life before finding that dying man. "Silas asked me to," he said simply, "and it seemed the right thing to do." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Besides," he added, a rare, faint smile touching his lips, "my corn wasn't going to win any prizes this year anyway." Lena managed a small smile in return, a fleeting warmth that surprised him. Their progress was slow. Elias pushed them as hard as he dared, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and the canyon. He knew the Caleb brothers would eventually check the cabin. When they found Lena gone, they would come looking. The thought spurred him on. He tried to follow the dying man's back trail, hoping it might lead them away from any pursuit, but the signs were faint and often confusing. Late that afternoon, as they were crossing a wide, exposed plain, Elias spotted them, 3 riders, distant figures on the horizon, moving purposefully in their direction. "Riders," he said, his voice tight. "Coming fast." Lena's face went white. "It's them. It has to be." There was nowhere to hide on the open plain. Their only chance was to outrun them, but Jezebel, old and carrying a double burden if Lena couldn't manage on her own for long, was no match for fresh horses. Elias scanned the terrain desperately. A line of low bluffs lay a mile or so to their east. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope for cover. "Hold on tight," he urged Lena, and slapped Jezebel's rump, urging the tired mule into a jarring trot, then a reluctant canter. The pursuit was relentless. The Caleb brothers, if it was indeed them, gained steadily. Elias could hear their faint shouts now, carried on the wind. Jezebel was laboring, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Lena clung to the saddle horn, her face grim. Elias knew they wouldn't make the bluffs. He had to make a stand, or at least try to slow them down. He pulled Jezebel to a halt behind a small rise, barely large enough to offer momentary concealment. "Get down," he told Lena, helping her slide from the mule. "Stay low. I'm going to try and discourage them." He pulled his Colt, checking the load. His hands were surprisingly steady. The riders crested a nearby swell, their figures stark against the sky. 3 of them, armed with rifles. They spotted Jezebel and pulled up, fanning out slightly. One of them, a burly man with a thick black beard, yelled, "Thorne, that you? You got something that belongs to us." Elias didn't answer. He wasn't sure if they knew his name, or were just guessing. He raised his Colt and fired a shot over their heads. The crack of the pistol echoed across the plain. The riders ducked instinctively. "That girl ain't your concern," the bearded man shouted back, his voice laced with fury. "Send her out, and you can walk away." Elias knew it was a lie. They wouldn't let him walk away, not now. "She's not going anywhere with you," he yelled back. He fired another shot, aiming for the ground near one of their horses. The animal shied and its rider cursed. This bought them a few precious seconds. "Lena," Elias said, his voice urgent, "when I give the word, you run for those bluffs. Don't look back. I'll try to hold them off." Lena looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a fierce resolve. "I'm not leaving you," she said. We faced them together. Elias was taken aback by her courage. He saw the spirit Silas must have seen in her, the spirit the Calebs were trying to crush. "All right," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Together then." The Caleb brothers began to advance again, more cautiously this time, using the sparse cover of sagebrush and rocks. Elias knew his handgun was no match for their rifles at this range. He needed to make every shot count, to make them think twice about pressing their attack. One of the brothers dismounted, trying to get a clearer shot. Elias took careful aim and fired. The bullet kicked up dust near the man's feet, making him jump back. "You're making a big mistake, farmer," the bearded leader bellowed. It was then that Lena did something unexpected. She scrambled to where Jezebel stood, untied the small, nearly empty sack of beans from the saddle, and with a surprising strength, hurled it towards a patch of dry brush a short distance away from their position. Then she yelled, "Fire! They're trying to burn us out." Her voice, though strained, carried conviction. The Caleb brothers, momentarily confused by this sudden diversion, turned their attention to the brush. Elias seized the opportunity. He fired 2 quick shots in their direction, not aiming to hit, but to distract. "Now," he yelled to Lena, grabbing Jezebel's reins, "to the bluffs." They scrambled away from their meager cover, Elias pulling the reluctant mule, Lena running alongside, her earlier weakness forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. The Caleb brothers, realizing they'd been tricked, let out enraged shouts and resumed their pursuit, their rifle shots now closer, whining past Elias's head. The bluff seemed miles away, an impossible sanctuary. Jezebel, terrified by the gunfire, stumbled, nearly going down. Elias hauled her up, his muscles screaming in protest. Lena, seeing his struggle, grabbed onto the mule's other side, adding her strength to his. They reached the edge of the bluffs, a jumble of fallen rocks and steep inclines offering better cover. Elias found a narrow defile, a natural trench that offered some protection. He pushed Lena and Jezebel into it, then turned to face their pursuers, his Colt ready. The Caleb brothers were closing in, more cautious now that their targets had cover. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows, making aiming more difficult for both sides. A tense standoff ensued. Shots were exchanged sporadically, bullets ricocheting off the rocks with angry whines. Elias knew they couldn't hold out for long. His ammunition was running low, and Lena, despite her bravery, was nearing exhaustion. Just as despair began to set in, he heard it, the distant sound of multiple horses, and then a shout that was not from the Calebs. "Hold your fire, Marshal's office." A wave of disbelief, then overwhelming relief, washed over Elias. Lena gripped his arm, her eyes wide. Peering over the rocks, Elias saw a posse of 4 riders galloping towards them, led by a man wearing a star. The Caleb brothers, caught between Elias's fire and the approaching lawmen, hesitated for a moment, then wheeled their horses around and fled, disappearing into the growing dusk. The marshal, a weathered man named Griggs, reined in his horse near their position. "You folks all right?" he called out. Elias stood up slowly, his body aching, his nerves frayed. "We are now, Marshal, thanks to you." Lena emerged from the defile, her face smudged and tear-streaked, but her shoulders straight. "They were the Caleb brothers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They held me captive." Marshal Griggs listened intently as Lena recounted her story, Elias adding details about finding Silas and the map. The marshal nodded grimly. "We've had reports about the Calebs. Rustling, intimidation. Silas Affirm was a good man. We'd been wondering what happened to him after he came to my office asking about how to file a formal complaint against them. He mentioned he was going to try and get you out of their reach, Miss Cartwright, and gather more solid proof. Looks like he almost made it." He looked at Elias with respect. "You did a brave thing, Mr. Thorne. That map wasn't leading to gold, but it led you to something far more valuable. The posse had been tracking the Calebs after reports of them harassing settlers in the area, and Silas's earlier visit had made them suspect the Calebs might be involved in his disappearance when he didn't return. The sound of gunfire had drawn them to this exact spot. It was a stroke of luck, or perhaps providence, that they had arrived when they did. Under the marshal's protection, they made their way to the small settlement of Willow Creek, the closest place with a proper jail. Lena gave her formal testimony against the Caleb brothers, her voice clear and steady, detailing their threats, her captivity, and Silas's murder. Elias corroborated her account. Marshal Griggs assured them that he would hunt the Calebs down. "They won't get far," he said with grim determination. "Men like that, they always make mistakes." Elias found himself at a loose end. His brief, violent adventure was over. His farm, his debts, the bleakness of his former life, all awaited him. But something had changed. The emptiness inside him felt less vast. He had faced danger, not for personal gain but for another, and in doing so, had found a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Lena approached him as he was preparing to leave Willow Creek with Jezebel. She looked much improved after a night's rest and a proper meal. Her eyes, no longer shadowed by fear, held a warmth that reached him. "Mr. Thorne," she began, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Elias shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with her praise. "Anyone would have done the same, ma'am." "No," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. "Not everyone. Silas knew he could trust you, even without knowing you. He saw something in you, I think, just like I do." She hesitated, then continued. "My ranch, it's not much, and with the Calebs still out there, I'm not sure." Elias understood her unspoken fear. She was alone, vulnerable. He thought of his own barren farm, the quiet, empty cabin. An idea, unexpected and audacious, formed in his mind. "Marshal Griggs said he'll get the Calebs, but until then, well, my farm ain't much either, but it's safe. Or it could be. It could use a woman's touch. And maybe two working together could make a go of it where one has failed." He looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. He wasn't offering charity, but a partnership, a chance for both of them to build something new from the ashes of their pasts. Lena looked at him, a slow smile spreading across her face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and lit them from within. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Thorne," she said. "And I learn fast." Elias felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. "Elias," he corrected her gently. "My name is Elias." "Lena," she replied, her smile widening. The journey back to Elias's farm was different. The land, still harsh, no longer seemed so empty. Lena rode Jezebel, her posture more confident, her eyes taking in the landscape with interest rather than fear. They talked, sharing stories of their pasts, their small hopes for the future. Elias found himself speaking of Martha, of his struggles, with an openness that surprised him. Lena, in turn, spoke of her parents, of her love for her small ranch, her determination to see justice done for Silas. By the time they reached his small, weathered cabin, it felt less like his solitary refuge and more like the beginning of something shared. The cabin was still dilapidated, the fields still parched, but now there was a flicker of hope, a shared purpose. The map hadn't led to gold, but it had led Elias Thorne to a different kind of treasure, one he was only just beginning to understand. He looked at Lena, standing beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a quiet strength in her stance. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, and for the first time in a long time, Elias felt like tomorrow might be a good day. He had found more than a trapped woman. He had found a reason to fight for a future that suddenly seemed possible, even bright, beside her. He watched her turn towards the small garden patch Martha had tended, a thoughtful expression on her face, and knew that the treasure he'd stumbled upon was the chance for a new beginning, right here, on this tired piece of land, with this resilient woman by his side. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment and quiet industry. Lena, true to her word, was a hard worker. She had a knack for making the small cabin more livable, her presence chasing away some of the lingering shadows of Elias's solitude. She mended his worn clothes, organized the sparse pantry, and even managed to coax a few stubborn vegetables from Martha's neglected garden patch. Elias, in turn, worked the land with renewed vigor, his movements less burdened, his mind less consumed by despair. They fell into a rhythm of shared tasks, punctuated by quiet conversations in the evenings, the flickering lamplight casting a warm glow over their simple meals. News eventually reached them from Willow Creek. Marshal Griggs and his posse had tracked down the Caleb brothers holed up in an old mining camp. After a brief, fierce shootout, 2 of the brothers were captured. The third, the bearded leader who had threatened Elias, was killed resisting arrest. A measure of justice had been served, and a palpable tension eased from Lena's shoulders. Her father's ranch, she learned, was secure, the Caleb's fraudulent claims dismissed. Yet, when the time came that she could have safely returned to her own property, Lena hesitated. She had come to find a certain peace on Elias's struggling farm, a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. And Elias, though he would never have admitted it aloud, found her presence indispensable. The quiet companionship, the shared laughter over a small success, the unspoken understanding that grew between them, these were things he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Lena spoke softly. "Elias," she said, "my ranch, it's there. But this place, it started to feel like home too." Elias looked at her, her profile serene in the fading light. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the porch rail. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. "It wouldn't be much of a home without you, Lena," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. She turned her hand, her fingers lacing with his. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken promises and the quiet certainty of a shared future. The treasure map had indeed led him to something precious, not a hoard of gold, but a partnership forged in hardship, a quiet love discovered in the most unexpected of circumstances. He looked out at the land, no longer seeing just barren earth, but a place of possibility, a place where, together, they might finally make things grow. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion overcoming prejudice and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. They survived hardship and found a new beginning. What are you hoping for them next? Share in the comments.